Hey, this is Nick Knudsen from readandreaction.com, here to read my latest article, the 12-team college football playoff preview. I'm splitting it into three parts here. This is part one, which schools will make the field. So there's a lot of talk around an expanded playoff coming to college football in the near future, looking like it's going to be maybe that 2025 mark when some of these contracts are up, and that's going to be the eventual switch. Nothing is set in stone. A lot of people are still having strong opinions on it, but it's becoming more and more of a reality that looks like the direction we're going to be headed. There is still a chance it could go to 8 or 6. It's not, like I said, nothing set in stone. But when I first heard the idea of a 12-team playoff, I wasn't super pumped about it. I like the old school part of college football where it's extremely difficult to win a national title. There's no 9-7 New York Giants and Eli Manning got hot for a couple weeks in January, ran the table, and who cares about the 7 losses in the regular season? I believe me, I'm a Florida Gator fan. I'm plenty of a college football snob in terms of, like, I like the elite being the elite in some capacities. You know, I as much as I would push for Cincinnati to have the opportunity to make the playoff this year, there's part of me that understand. I also understand that they just don't play the schedule week to week that a lot of these other conferences play. But a lot of things had to happen. A lot of dominoes had to fall for Cincinnati to get that chance this year, and they did fall, and I felt like Cincinnati did deserve the chance this year. So in a 12-team system, you might see more situations like a Cincinnati, or more likely, what you might be more likely discussing with some 3-loss teams, maybe 4-loss teams. I don't know. I wanted to see what it would look like over the course of the last 30 years in college football back to 1992. So you had 30 even seasons. I like that number, just a nice, easy number. But why 1992? 1992 is when the SEC expanded and created the SEC championship game. And that pushed a lot of the growth in modern-day college football. That moment in 1992 pushed a lot of the growth in modern-day college football. And so going from 1992 until this past 2021 season, which teams would have made the most playoff appearances? So this is the article, the 12-team college football playoff preview, part one, which schools would make the field. An expanded 12-team playoff field seems like it's just around the corner for college football. This series will focus on how a 12-team playoff could play out. On November 14, 2011, the Presidential Oversight Committee members met in Denver to discuss the formation of a playoff in college football. The meeting took place just 2 Saturdays after number 1 LSU went on the road and held off number 2 Alabama in a defensive slugfest for a 9-6 victory in the, quote, game of the century, unquote. Les Miles improved his record to 3-2 over Nick Saban's Crimson Tide, and LSU dealt what seemed like the death blow to any hopes of the Tide capturing its second title under Saban. It was not unheard of for a team who did not win their conference to make the BCS title game. Nebraska did it in 2001 when they made the Rose Bowl. Oklahoma, the 2004 Sugar, after they lost the conference title game to Kansas State that year. They each failed to win their conference, yet still made that final game. But until LSU and Bama battled down to the wire on an early November 2011 night in Tuscaloosa, the odds were stacked against 2 teams from the same conference landing in both of the top spots of the BCS rankings. There had been one notable previous attempt to argue the 2 best teams played in the same conference heading into the BCS championship game. Gator fans, you might be familiar with it. It was in 2006. Chad Henne's number 2 Wolverines fell to the eventual Heisman Trophy winner, Troy Smith, and the number 1 Buckeyes in the games version of the game of the century. However, voters vaulted the SEC champion Gators into the final number 2 BCS ranking over Michigan. And after Urban Meyer's second Florida roster scorched Ohio State in the desert and Michigan fell to USC in the Rose Bowl, there was no question that voters had made the right call in giving the Gators a shot at that point. Back to 2011, though, Alabama was punished for the loss to LSU and dropped to the number 4 spot in the polls behind unbeaten's LSU, Oklahoma State, and Stanford. Another unbeaten loomed, but it was number 5 Boise State, In group of 5 teams, they've had a tough enough time making the playoff in the 14 playoff era. So a top 2 ranking in the BCS era was almost out of the question. Every other major Power 5 threat had been saddled with at least one loss, but none of those losses had impressed voters as much as Alabama's valiant effort against the top-ranked Tigers. Over the next 2 weeks, Stanford took a 53-30 beating at the hands of Oregon, and Oklahoma State fell in double overtime to Iowa State. Not Matt Campbell's Iowa State, Paul Rhodes' Iowa State. In case the universe needed to deliver more help for the Crimson Tide, Boise State managed to drop a game to TCU as well, leaving the Houston Cougars a non-threat in the polls as the lone unbeaten group of 5 team. When the final standings took shape on December 5th, 2011, the pollsters decided Oklahoma State and Stanford's losses did not impress as much as Bama's lone defeat and rewarded the Tide with the final number 2 BCS ranking to set up an unprecedented all BCS championship showdown in the Sugar Bowl against both conference and division rival LSU. The perfect storm created a mess at the top, giving voters the ability to justify their decision to rank Alabama as the second best team in the nation. And the final standings that year were number 1 LSU, who was 13-0. They were the SEC champion. Number 2 Alabama, 11-1, second place in the SEC West to that LSU team. Oklahoma State finished 3rd, Big 12 champions. They did finish the season with that 11-1 record, but that one loss to Iowa State in double overtime, just too much to overcome. Stanford finished 11-1, but they did not win the Pac-12 North. Instead, the number 5 team at 10-2 was the Pac-12 champion Oregon Ducks that year. So that loss to the Ducks, too much for Stanford to overcome. Alabama gets into that number 2 spot. Nobody outside of Tuscaloosa was happy with this arrangement, especially since the SEC had won 5 straight national championships dating back to the 2006 Florida Gators. And by the summer of 2012, the BCS Presidential Oversight Committee voted to allow the concept, which would eventually lead to the college football playoff. Adam Himmelsbeck of the New York Times wrote, after the controversy surrounding the much derided Bowl Championship Series, after the annual debates about which teams deserve to play in the national title game, a 4-team playoff will be implemented in the 2014 season. Now there will be controversy over which teams are number 4 and number 5 as opposed to number 1 and number 2, cautioned SEC Commissioner Roy Kramer at the time. But this does broaden participation, and I think that's what they were looking for. In an era that had come to be dominated by the SEC, a 14 playoff was seen as a way to help schools from other conferences get their foot in the door on a more regular basis. Through 8 seasons, the playoff has incorporated teams from every part of the FBS footprint. Each of the Power 5 conferences have been represented, an independent in Notre Dame, and finally a group of 5 school this past season in Cincinnati. The SEC has still featured in 7 of the 8 national. The SEC has still been featured in 7 of the 8 national title games in the playoff era, including 2 all-SEC matchups, Bama, Georgia in 2017, and in this past season in 2021. In 5 of those 7 tries, the SEC has walked away with another national title. Bama's done it 3 times in the playoff era, LSU once, Georgia once, which I hope we won't acknowledge that too many more times for you Gator fans out there. Last week, well-known anti-playoff expansionist Josh Pate of the Late Kick issued a warning to the rest of college football. You really want to see a situation, a tournament in college football where you get in with no cap on the SEC, and all of a sudden, now you're watching meaningful playoff games, he said sarcastically, as opposed to those meaningless bowl games. You're setting yourself up for disaster. You're setting yourself up down the road for 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 4, a clean sweep semifinal featuring all SEC teams, Pate said on the latest episode of the Late Kick 24/7 Sports. The SEC haters of the world will not appreciate Pate's words of warning, writing it off as nothing more than SEC posturing. One common misconception, though, about the SEC is that it's a top-heavy league. For those who decry the SEC as a top-heavy league full of teams assigning themselves credit for whatever combination of Alabama +2 is dominating the sport throughout any given season, I would ask you to hold that measure to any other league in America. 5 different SEC schools, Alabama, LSU, Florida, Auburn, and Georgia, have won national titles since 2008. Take it back a few more years to 1998, and that number bumps up to 6 with the inclusion of the Tennessee Volunteers. Let's try to use that top-heavy standard on any other conference. We'll use the current conference affiliations. Even though Nebraska did not win a national title under the Big Ten flag, we'll assign those values to the Big Ten for the sake of time. In the Big Ten, to find 6 different national champions like you have in the SEC dating back to 1998, to find 6 different national championships among the current members of the Big Ten, you'd have to go back to Minnesota in 1960, Ohio State, Michigan's half a title in 1997, Nebraska as a Big 12 member, Penn State as an independent twice in the 1980s. In 1965 and 1966, Michigan State fill out the other 5. In the ACC, similar to the Big Ten, 1959 Syracuse would be the 6th different school to claim a national title for the ACC, though the title was not won as a member of the league. You have Clemson, FSU, Miami, not ACC Miami, 1990 Georgia Tech, 1976 Pitt, not ACC Pitt, were the first 5 schools on the list in the ACC. So back to 1959 for the ACC. For the Big 12, 2005 Texas was the last Big 12 school to raise a banner. Despite their seemingly annual contention, Oklahoma has failed to win a title since 2000. Since Nebraska and Colorado are being counted for other conferences, the run to find a 3rd school that has won a national title in the Big 12 stretches all the way back to the mighty 1938 TCU Horned Frogs, again, not a Big 12 member at the time, led by Heisman Trophy winner Davey O'Brien and head coach Dutch Meyer. Since I've punished the Big 12 by discounting Nebraska and Colorado, I'll extend a helping hand and give them credit for UCF 2017 LOL and BYU 1984, which was robbed from the Gators. Go back to 1984 and check out the 1984 Gators. The would-be national champions should be national champions to extend their count to 5 programs. Sticking with the theme of creating titles out of thin air, Oklahoma State, previously known as Oklahoma A&M, was retroactively gifted a national title for their unbeaten 1945 season by the AFCA in the year of our Lord 2016. So this title did not exist until 2016. The AFCA happened to go back. They did a project where they were asked to go back and assign some champions and I believe before the creation of their particular poll, and they went back and assigned the 1945 one to Oklahoma A&M, which became Oklahoma State. Army was the actual 1945 champion. So I wonder how the actual 1945 national champs at West Point would feel about that claim. Let that be a lesson to the kids out there too, just like UCF and Oklahoma State and everything, all these Big 12 members, that if you use your imagination, you too can conjure up all kinds of national title claims. So the Big 12 is really inspirational to the imagination of children everywhere. The Pac-12, if you want to get to 6 teams, outside of USC, which last won in 2004, the Pac-12 is a wasteland when it comes to winning national titles. 1991 Washington, 1999 Colorado, Big 12 Colorado, not Pac-12 Colorado, counting it as a member of the Pac-12 though, are the only league members to win it all since 1954 UCLA. So this Pac-12 drought thing in the playoff, not a new concept in the world. 1926 Stanford for the 5th program, and the 6th and final program, 1922 Cal. Go Cal Bears, 1922. Oregon, they seem destined to win one at some point, but as of today, the old joke says the logo matches their number of national titles. 0. If you give the SEC the entire timeline of college football, like we've done with these other conferences, Arkansas, not as an SEC member, won it in 1964. Ole Miss did it in 1960. Texas A&M, not as an SEC member, did it in 1939, 1919. That would run the SEC total of programs who have won at least one national title to nine. 9 different schools have captured at least a national title at one point. And though the SEC may appear to be top heavy at times, nearly 2/3 of the league's programs are capable of fielding national title worthy teams. And that's just unheard of across the sport right now. So that kind of depth does not exist in any other conference. And to Josh Pate's point, expanding the playoff will likely lead to more SEC dominance, at least in the near future. So if you want to count them up, I still wanted to test Pate's theory to further illustrate the point with specifics against a playoff field of 12 teams, since it appears that's the next step in expansion, using the AP poll, because it's a consistent poll from 1992 to today. You know, the BCS rankings didn't start till 1998. The college football playoff rankings started in 2014, obviously, but the AP poll has been a constant dating back to 1992. So I'll use that one because it provides the even 30 years of data for us. And in 1992, again, it's the first season in which a conference championship game took place. I've calculated the number of playoff appearances each school and conference would have earned by way of a top 12 ranking in the final regular season AP poll. And that's that poll that's right after the conference championship weekend. So not right before bowl season. So not the final one at the end of the season, the one right before bowl season, because that would be your playoff field. So, and I wrote that was typically the first Monday. That AP poll comes out typically the first Monday in December after the conference championship weekend. So in the Power Five, starting with the Power Five, if we're counting the number of playoff appearances since 1992 in a 12-team field, the SEC would have earned 25% of all playoff appearances with 92 playoff bids. Alabama would have 16, LSU would have 11, Auburn 9, Arkansas 4, Ole Miss 2, Mississippi State 1, Texas A&M 6. And that's a total of 49 bids for the SEC West of the 92. In the SEC East, Georgia would have appeared 14 times. Florida, a league leading 17 times. Bama went to sleep in the 90s. Florida kept it going. Florida's run in the 90s really helps that number. So at 17. Tennessee, 8 appearances. Kentucky, 0 appearances. South Carolina, 2 appearances. Vanderbilt, 0 appearances. Missouri, 2 appearances. So that's 43 appearances in the top 12 for the SEC East. So the East has been gets ragged on a lot. They only have 6 less playoff bids than the SEC West since 1992 if you do that 12-team field. So it's fairly even split there. The West has that slight lead. So again, assuming the top 12 of the AP poll since 1992 created our playoff field, this is my takeaway for the SEC. The SEC earned 25% of the playoff spots over the last 30 years. That's 92 of the 360 spots, if you want to check my math. More than any other conference at just over an average of 3 teams per year in the playoff. Each SEC school earned a playoff spot in a 12-team system except Kentucky and Vanderbilt. Yes, Arkansas has 4 bids. Florida's success in the 1990s provided the Gators with a leg up on the Tide for the most playoff berths. And really a question I came up with after looking at this data is, could an expanded 12-team playoff change the tenor of fan base when evaluating a coach? Good example. You don't have to look far from home. Dan Mullen would have earned a playoff bid in his first 3 seasons at the helm of the Gators. Would that have been enough to save his job despite a lackluster 2021? Mullen also earned a playoff spot in 2014 with Dak Prescott and the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Only 25% of all college football teams have earned 4 or more playoff bids since 1992. Only Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, Georgia, Notre Dame, and Oklahoma are able to match Mullen's 4 playoff bids since 2014. So judging by those numbers, Dan Mullen is among the elite in college football in getting his teams into the top 12. And he should be snapped up quickly in the next coaching cycle, considering the fact that, hey, you have a great shot at getting in the top 12 with Dan Mullen. Now, the University of Florida, is that the standard? It's obviously not. That's why he's not employed anymore at the University of Florida. But Interesting note that he would have made the playoffs in his first 3 seasons at Florida. If you think that's no big deal, Jimbo Fisher, by comparison, has only earned one playoff, would have only earned one playoff bid for a top 12 finish at Texas A&M, and that was last year in 2020, his shortened season. So it's under the same constraints. But the guy who got fired before him, who wasn't good enough, he wasn't giving enough to the university. It wasn't good enough for the university there anymore. Kevin Sumlin, 2012, he would have had a playoff bid as well. So Jimbo, as well respected as his tenure at A&M has become, I think a lot of college football fans look at the recruiting numbers and they know that Texas A&M is really building its roster up, and it's not the same as it was with Sumlin, but the on-field results. Just one playoff bid in the top 12, just one top 12 finish for Jimbo Fisher since his days in College Station and started a few years back. And that's not exactly what you'd expect out of that contract. So Dan Mullen would have had 3 playoff appearances, same amount of time. Jimbo Fisher only has 1. Bama would have missed the playoff twice in the Saban era. So for those of you who think Bama would have never missed the playoff era, but for those of you who think Bama would never miss the playoff, technically incorrect, although their last missed playoff appearance would have been in 2010. So they wouldn't have missed a playoff appearance since 2011. But 2010, they finished outside the top 12. And, of course, his first year in 2007, that team that lost to Louisiana Monroe. So the 2 times that Saban would not have made it, 2010 and 2007. Tennessee tallied 8 appearances between 1992 and 2003. But the Vols are in the midst of an 18-year playoff drought right now. They have not finished in the top 12 over the course of the last 18 seasons. Steve Spurrier would have led 9 playoff appearances at Florida between 1992 and 2001, and the only 2 in program history at South Carolina in 2012 and 2013. Of course, those great teams at South Carolina. That I believe was that when I believe Clowney was still there, the 2012-2013 seasons. So that would be 11 total for the head ball coach on his resume. So that's not too shabby there, Steve Spurrier. Lane Kiffin would have rebuilt Ole Miss in a matter of 2 years into a playoff team. They would have made the playoffs for the second time since 1992 this past season. Let's jump over to the Big Ten. So we had 92 appearances for SEC schools, 76 for the Big Ten, making up just over 21% of the playoff field. This one, though, if you want to talk about top heavy, the Big Ten, Ohio State has 23 of those 76 appearances since 1992. The next highest total, Nebraska with 9, Penn State with 9. And then you have Michigan with 8, Michigan State with 7, Indiana with 1, which would have been in 2020, shortened season there. Rutgers has 0, to no surprise. Maryland would have had 1 back in the day with the Fridge, where they played the Gators. I believe that was the season they played the Gators in the Orange Bowl. As a member of the ACC, they would have had 1. Wisconsin only would have had 8. That number surprised me a little bit. So they would still be trailing Nebraska's 9 because Nebraska was in it virtually almost every season in the 90s there. Purdue has 1. Minnesota has an appearance. 1 appearance, Nebraska 3, Illinois 1, Iowa 4. So you're looking at every school in the Big Ten outside of Rutgers. The Big Ten West, if you want to split it up by divisions, 27 of those 76 appearances. So 49 appearances out of the East, 23 of which belong to Ohio State. So again, assuming the top 12 of the AP poll since 1992 created our playoff field, here are some takeaways for the Big Ten Conference. The Big Ten earned the next highest total number of bids for a single conference with 76. However, Ohio State is responsible for nearly 1/3 of all Big Ten bids. Top heavy, every Big Ten school would have made the 12-team playoff since 1992, except for Rutgers. Yes, Illinois, Purdue, and Minnesota each have a berth under their belts. While an expanded playoff might diminish the value of losing a game in the regular season for the top teams, more fan bases will be engaged throughout the season, knowing their 2-loss team may have a shot at the playoffs or playing spoiler for their opponent. There would also be more marquee games with direct impact on the playoff race each week. So those seasons that don't go your way right now, where you're out of the race after 2 losses, you're not necessarily out of the race. There's a lot more marquee games available. A lot more meat on the schedule in this college football world, in the 12-team college football playoff. Ohio State would be a mainstay in the playoff, only missing 2011, 2004, 2001, and 2000 since the turn of the century in the AP Top 12. Jim Harbaugh, he's been until this past season, it's Jim Harbaugh can't do it. He's failing at Michigan. He can't beat the Buckeyes. Sure, he's doing okay, but it's not going the way he planned. Jim Harbaugh may have only beaten the Buckeyes in 2021, but this would have been the Wolverines' third playoff berth under Harbaugh since they finished the regular season ranked in the top 12 in both 2018 and 2016. So third playoff berth for Harbaugh. Would that shape that shapes the conversation a lot differently around Michigan football under Jim Harbaugh? This is one of my favorite examples going back to childhood here because this was a great team I remember. But in 1994, an unbeaten Penn State team led by Kerry Collins and Kajana Carter had its shot against Nebraska. Instead of being stuck in the Rose Bowl against an overmatched Oregon team, it would have been great to see those teams play. That 94 Nebraska team, they were an unbelievable force. But it would have been great to see that Penn State team get a shot at Nebraska. That's a tragedy that game never occurred. Speaking of the Cornhuskers, their epic run in the 90s, it still concludes in 2001. Nebraska's not finished in the AP Top 12 poll since in the AP Top 12 since the days of Crouch and Solich. So no real change for Nebraska football. You'd still be in the desert struggling. Paul Chryst, Brett Bielema, and Barry Alvarez would each have led the Badgers to multiple playoff bids. So you talk about consistency across the program, 3 different coaches leading multiple playoff bids. That's a successful formula working up there in Madison. And I know they don't get into that. They're not into that. They haven't gotten into that playoff yet. I know they've been close a couple times, but man, if they 12-team playoff, they would be in it fairly regularly there with 8 bids over the last 30 years here. Pac-12, let's go to the Pac-12 next with 54 total bids. That's 15% of the field. So 54 of the 360 bids over the course of 30 years going to the Pac-12. Oregon has 12 of those bids. Washington has 5, Washington State 3, Oregon State 1, Cal 1, Stanford 6, Utah 4, Arizona State 2, UCLA 2, USC 10, Colorado 6, and Arizona has 2 bids. So assuming the top 12 of the AP poll since 1992 created our playoff field, 54 total bids for the Pac-12 since 1992. The Pac-12 has long relied on USC for some semblance of national relevance, but Oregon has picked up the slack in the Trojans' near decade and a half absence from the top of the sport. 10 of the Ducks' 12 playoff bids have occurred since 2000 in a 12-team field. Washington, you think of them as they won that national title in 91. They had a very, very strong program throughout the 80s with Don James there. But they really, their resume is more a few bright spots with not much in between, right? Since those early 90s days. And so in-state rival Washington State, who doesn't carry nearly the cachet on the national level that Washington seems to enjoy, they've produced nearly the same amount of playoff bids in the last 3 decades. So it's a 5-3 split there with the Huskies and the Cougars. UCLA, Arizona, and Arizona State with 2 bids apiece is a joke considering the recruiting landscape of SoCal and Arizona. If they kept kids home in those areas at those schools would take off. One of these 3 teams, UCLA, Arizona State, one of these 3 teams should really be in the top 12 annually if you think about the area they're recruiting in. So this is just really a symptom of what's wrong with Pac-12 football, in my opinion, is that these underperforming programs are keeping the conference down, particularly in recent years. These are programs that should shine more in college football that just, for whatever reason, can't put it all together. The story of Utah's rise from a group of 5 beasts to a Power 5 conference champion this past season would have been written over 4 playoff runs since 2004 to establish the Utes as one of the big boys in college football. They were the scrappy group of 5 team that built themselves up. You win a Power 5 conference, hey, you play about anybody. So Utah, one of the big boys now in college football, coming to the Swamp to open the 2022 season, Billy Napier's first game. Stanford recorded 4 straight playoff bursts from 2010 to 2013. Of course, remember that was the time when Andrew Luck was around. A couple other they had, that pass from Harbaugh to Shaw. They had a good run for a while there. They had a couple other seasons after 2013 that were pretty solid as well. Colorado was a national power in the late 80s and early 90s, but Ralphie would have also run the playoff spots in 2001 and 2016. So Colorado racking up a few extra playoff spots, even though you haven't thought about them much since those late 80s, early 90s days. On to the Big 12, which has less bids than the Pac-12, with 53 of the 360 spots. That's just shy of 15%, 14.72%. Oklahoma has 17 bids. No surprise there for that big number for Oklahoma. Texas only has 9. Oklahoma State 2. Texas Tech 1. TCU 5. Iowa State 1. Baylor 4. Kansas 2. Probably the most shocking number of the entire exercise. Remember 2007. Didn't remember another one. We'll get to that in a minute. Kansas State has 9 bids. Another one that jumped out to me. They've had a lot of good teams over the years, and because they don't get in that national title picture too much, you might forget about them. But they're in that top 12 9 times in the last 30 years. That's pretty good for the Kansas State Wildcats. And West Virginia only 3. A number that was lower than I expected too. Assuming the top 12 of the AP poll since 1992 created the playoff field, Oklahoma has been a force since Bob Stoops arrived. All 17 bids coming since the year 2000. Impressive stuff out of Norman. Texas has the brand, but K-State has made just as many playoff appearances in the 12-team field since 1992. Looking forward to the Wildcat Network, ESPN. Get us into Manhattan, Kansas stat. We need it. The Kansas Jayhawks, they weren't a fluke in 2007. They were also qualified for a 12-team playoff field in 1995, finishing 9-2. Does this mean we can expect a playoff run from Kansas every 12 years or so? Seeing as the Jayhawks missed the playoffs in 2019, it's only fair to say Kansas is overdue for a playoff bid at this point. Baylor and TCU, spurned by the College Football Playoff Committee for the number 4 spot in favor of Ohio State in 2014, have surged to combine for 9 appearances since 2008. That's good stuff there with Baylor and TCU. Does Oklahoma State stick with Mike Gundy after missing the playoffs for 9 straight seasons from 2012 to 2020? A school like Oklahoma State might acknowledge the realities of being able to consistently topple Oklahoma and be in the national title hunt every single year on an annual basis. But surely the Pokes are capable of being a top 12 program more than once a decade, right? This might be a reverse Mullen situation that I mentioned with Florida. Mullen might have been saved by his playoff burst. Gundy might have been canned for the playoff drought. So again, 12-team playoff, can it create different situations for different coaches? Of course, we know Mike Gundy in Oklahoma State, they had a good run this year. They got to the Big 12 title game, and they had that near loss to Baylor. Let's jump to the ACC. The ACC has a total of 50 playoff bids since 1992 in that 12-team system. That's good for 13.88% of the field. It's an exact even split between the Atlantic and the coastal divisions. But the ACC, you want to talk about top heavy. The story in the ACC is about 4 programs only. I'm going to go through and read it, and then we'll get through our thoughts on the conference here. Clemson only has 7 bids. That number surprised me. Florida State, 14. Louisville, 2. Wake Forest, 0. NC State, 1. Syracuse, 1. They each had it same year back in the early 90s. Boston College, no bids for Boston College. 9 for Miami, 0 for Pitt, 9 for Virginia Tech, 0 for Virginia, 4 for North Carolina, 3 for Georgia Tech, 0 for Duke. I don't think that one surprises anyone. So again, assuming the top 12 of the AP poll since 1992 created a playoff field, 39 out of 50 bids originate from 4 schools: Clemson, Florida State, Virginia Tech, and Miami. Despite recent success, Clemson has only posted half the playoff appearances of Florida State in a 12-team field since 1992, though FSU would have only qualified 3 times for a playoff spot since 2004. And you think about that great run they had with Jameis in the middle of the decade, it was only a few years. So only 3 times since 2004 would FSU have qualified for AP top 12 playoff spot. Mark Richt's 2017 Miami Hurricanes finished in the top 12 for the first time since Larry Coker's Canes in 2005. Virginia Tech's 9 appearances in the playoffs would have fell between 1996 and 2011. Odds are that Frank Beamer makes another appearance in the national title game during that stretch. Of course, we remember the Michael Vick year, but Virginia Tech was just one of those tough, nasty teams that were difficult to play during that stretch. Those early 2000s VOD Tech teams were excellent teams. So got to think they would have maybe had another national title game run in them at some point in the 12-team playoff. Duke being a non-factor did not surprise me, but Boston College throwing up a goose egg, that caught me off guard. Matty Ice had the Boston College Eagles ranked as high as number 2 in the BCS in late October 2007, but a late season swoon cost Boston College a shot at the playoffs. They lost in the ACC title game. It would have pushed them out of playoff contention. But, man, not one top 12 finish for Boston College since 1992. That one surprised me. Lamar Jackson. You may think, oh, what would Lamar have done with the playoff? I remember how he smoked the Gators in the Sugar Bowl, but he would not have qualified for the playoffs. That Louisville team, they were in that weak Big East that was barely hanging on by a thread before they became the American, I believe. And they would not qualify for the playoffs. They were like a number 25 in the country or something coming into that game. That's why it was such a big upset. The only 2 bids for the Cards came during the Brian Brom days in 2004 and 2006. So when Brian Brom was the quarterback there in Louisville. Of the independents, 14 bids, 12 of those bids go to Notre Dame, but 2 of them go to BYU. 5 of Notre Dame's 12 appearances since 1992 have occurred since 2011. So they've had a lot of success in the past decade. They've really come around. We've seen that in the regular playoff. They've made a few playoff appearances and they made a BCS national title game. So 3 of the last 4 seasons, they would have qualified for the playoff too. So a lot of recent success for Notre Dame. You're looking at Brian Kelly going down to LSU, and I know everyone's loving to making the jokes and everything, but he's done a heck of a job with the Notre Dame program that really struggled to find itself between the end of the Lou Holtz era and really when Kelly got on campus there. That was a kind of a dead period for Notre Dame football. Brian Kelly brought him back. So I know I like making the Brian Kelly jokes too, but it's a good football coach there going to LSU. He's done a good job with Notre Dame. BYU made its first playoff appearance in 2021 since 1996. So BYU would have been in it this year. We would have seen the Cougars. They would have been close last year too with that team with Zach Wilson. The 12-team playoff field in 2021, it would have featured 3 non-Power 5 teams: Cincinnati, Notre Dame, and BYU, all making the field. So, in addition to the Pac, we talked about the struggle of the Pac-12 a little bit, but 3 non-Power 5 teams would have made the field in 2021. Let's go on the group of 5. And the one thing you would think of on the surface is that it seems that the group of 5 would have a ton to gain to switch to a 12-team playoff. They're like, why wouldn't they? More teams, the more the merrier, right? However, a 12-team field won't be much friendlier to the group of 5 than either the BCS or a 4-team college football playoff was. So again, assuming the top 12 of the AP poll since 1992 created our playoff field, the group of 5 schools have only earned a little over 5% of the playoff spots in a 12-team field dating back to 1992. Only 19 times out of 360 spots, only 19 would have gone to group of 5 teams. So in the American, Cincinnati leads the way with 4 bids. The American Conference had 8 total bids. Cincinnati leads the way with 4. UCF would have had 2 bids, 2017, 2018 there. Houston had 1 bid, and Tulane had 1 bid as well. So no self-declared titles there, national titles there for UCF. 2017, 2018 would have been settled on the field. And you know what? That's the way they probably would have liked it too. 2011 Houston Cougars And I was thinking immediately when I saw the Houston Cougars, I was like, oh, well, Tom Herman, they had that great team and they went to the Peach Bowl. Nope, this was in 2011. So not Tom Herman, not even Art Briles. This was Kevin Sumlin's Houston Cougars with offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury and quarterback Case Keenum. Yes, that's the second time you've heard me mention Kevin Sumlin in this article. So 12-team playoff appearances there. Kevin Sumlin, not too shabby there. Remember Sean King and the unbeaten Tommy Bowden-led Tulane Green Wave in 1998? Unbeaten Tulane. They would have been in the playoff in 1998. Cincinnati broke through in a 14 playoff season, 14 playoff system, but the Bearcats are no stranger to the top 12, finishing there 4 times since 2008. Only one MAC team would have ever made the 12-team playoff. Western Michigan, PJ Fleck's Broncos rode the boat to a top 12 finish in a New Year's Six bowl bid back in 2016, that Cotton Bowl against Penn State. In the Mountain West, another conference would have had a strong resume in the group of 5 here. 8 playoff appearances, 6 of those going to Boise State, though. 1, Colt Brennan, June Jones, Hawaii in 2007. They went down to the Sugar Bowl, got smashed by Georgia. And Colorado State, back in the 90s, of Sonny Lubbock's Rams teams were pretty solid. They would have qualified for 1. Boise State, the original BCS buster, would have been a playoff regular for a stretch, making all 6 of their appearances between 2004 and 2011. So as much as you think of the Boise State Broncos being, of that class of the group of 5, they wouldn't have qualified for a playoff spot in the top 12 since 2011. It's been about a decade since Boise State would have been in the hunt. Hawaii rode the arm of Colt Brennan and June Jones and that wide open offense to a magical run in a Sugar Bowl berth in 2007. Colorado State worked its way into the top 10 in 1994, losing only to Utah in the regular season. I believe they ended up losing to Michigan in the Holiday Bowl there for a 2-loss season. But Colorado State, 1 loss in the regular season. Sun Belt, 1 bid in all time there. 2020, Coastal Carolina, the Chanticleers, they're the team that put Coastal on the map nationally. The unbeaten Chanticleers there, they played host to that memorable Mullets versus Mormons backyard pickup game in a year decimated by cancellations across the schedule. One of my favorite college football games of all time, BYU just saying, we'll play anybody, give us a good game, we'll pick up and go. And the game came together about 10 days before they actually played it. And, BYU sending their truck out to Myrtle Beach before the game's officially signed and ready to go. And BYU shows up, puts their undefeated record on, basically puts it at risk, and they end up losing to Coastal Carolina. But that was an excellent football game in 2020 that would have put Coastal in the playoffs last year. Conference USA, Marshall has 1 bid. This was back in their MAC days when they first jumped into the FBS. Randy Moss, and I was thinking, this had to be the Randy Moss year. Randy Moss made a strong impression in the Herd's first FBS season in 1997, but the only Marshall team to ever qualify for a top 12 spot would have been the Chad Pennington-led MAC champion Marshall Thundering Herd. So wrapping up this first section here, this first part 1 of the 12-team college football, 12-team preview here, with the SEC and the Big Ten combining for 46.66% of playoff spots in the 12-team playoff field since 1992, it's easy to see that simple expansion won't necessarily cut back on the repetitious nature of our current 4-team playoff model. Those percentages also lead me to believe that Josh Pate is correct in his assessment of a potential all-SEC semifinals. But is it in the sport's best interest to avoid such a scenario? The dominant teams will continue to dominate regardless of the model. And while the final few teams may be repetitive, would a 12-team playoff field create more interest across the sport, especially at programs which rarely get a sniff at contending for a title? Now that we know what a 12-team playoff model would look like, who would appear and how many times since 1992, what can we expect from the 12-team playoff based on the current proposals and talking points that have yet to be determined? What would matchups look like hosted at home fields or bowl sites? What would a successful campaign for the 12th spot look like? We know there's going to be plenty of arguments over that. We'll answer all these questions in the next segment of the 12-team college football playoff preview. Thank you for staying with me till the end. If you stayed here to the end, very much appreciative of that. This is Nick Knudsen with the 12-team college football playoff preview. This has been part one, which teams would make the field. I appreciate you listening to the article. Please be sure to check out the article on readingreaction.com. I know I'm firing a lot of numbers at you. Maybe it's easier to consume reading it too, but hopefully you enjoyed this piece, and we're going to continue to have audio versions of our articles available to you going forward. So wanted to thank you all for joining us today. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. We have a Patreon channel where we provide bonus content if you're interested in more. And of course, you always have the website to visit with our articles, readandreaction.com. Thanks a lot. Have a great night, and go Gators.